Hello, my name is Michael Golden, call sign KM8YOR, and thank you so much for joining me. This is the first part of the technician exam. It's actually part A of the first part of the technician exam for 2022 through 2026. It just started on July 1st this year, and it will go through that's June 31st of 2026. Now, T1 is the first part of the section. There's 6 sections total, and then there's a bunch of subsections within them. This is section A of T1. This is the commission's rules. So all the rules set by the FCC and what we have to follow. You can find all the answers in the part 97 of the FCC rules. So Part 97 refers to all amateur radio operations. It is a great place to just kind of peruse through. You'll see a lot of different rules in there, things we have to follow. There's 11 questions in this section. Keep in mind that only one question is going to come out of this when you take a test. So out of these 11 questions, you will for sure get one of them. It just kind of depends on what you get. Again, I typically recommend memorizing, but memorizing with purpose. Make sure you understand why the question is correct, but ultimately memorize them so you can pass the test. Again, go ahead and read part 97. Maybe have it next to you if you want to, not sure of an answer that we give. These are directly from the ARRL. You can go to arrl.org. You can download these questions. You can look at them. They have the answers and everything. So you're not cheating by going through this. But I want to go through them with you. Although there's not going to be a lot of context here. It's just kind of straightforward stuff. Some of the other ones, when we get into the technical stuff, we may dive deeper into them. But this part should be pretty simple, pretty quick. We just kind of want to make sure we understand them and understand some of the gotchas that may be in the different questions. So let's go ahead and we're going to head on to the first question. The first question is T1A01. We're just going right in order here. So first question, which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service? A, providing personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. Providing communications for international nonprofit organizations. Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Or D, all of these choices are correct. Now on this first question, I want to point out all these choices are correct. It's actually pretty rare that all of these choices are correct is the correct answer. I do want to point out that when I took the test about 6-7 years ago, about 50% of all of these choices are correct, were correct. I think it's even lower now. So maybe after I go through all these, I'll give you a full percentage on them. But keep in mind that all these choices are correct. You better be pretty clear on at least 2 of them being correct before you choose that one. So again, let's talk about the answers here. Answer A, providing personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. Well, that sounds like something that we would just kind of hand out, let people just, pay a small fee and get their license and everything. This is definitely a harder service that the government gives us, allows us to do, than just that. There is something out there that you can pay the FCC a small fee and your entire family can use a very small portion of the radio spectrum for communication. Amateur radio is not for that at all. B, providing communications for international nonprofit organizations. A big key about amateur radio is about the individual. The only organizations that have call signs really are clubs. So clubs with multiple individuals that are ham radio operators uh, can have a club sign for the entire club, but no organizations, no businesses, you're not allowed to use it for that purpose here. C. Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. That is dead on. Amateur radio is all about that. So, the correct answer is C. And we will head on to T1A02. Which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? A. FEMA, B. Homeland Security, C. the FCC, or D. All of these choices are correct. This is a very interesting question because FEMA and Homeland Security sound like branches of the government that have a lot of power, and certainly they do. But here is a very interesting thing that you're going to learn throughout this is that the government relies on us, especially in emergencies when it comes down to long distance communications. FEMA has a couple things set up. Certainly Homeland Security probably has their own frequencies, and the military has their own frequencies and things like that. But in citizen emergencies, we are the forefront to help out in that. So FEMA and Homeland Security has no power in this. It's all about the Federal Communications Commission. So the correct answer is C. So T1A03 is coming up. What do the FCC rules state regarding the use of the phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? Now, phonetic alphabet, we're talking about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, those kind of sayings for letters. There's a very specific set that we use that we'll talk more about. But that's kind of when we say phonetic alphabet, that's what we're talking about. So A, it is required when transmitting emergency messages. B, it is encouraged. C, it is required when in contact with foreign stations. Or D, all of these choices are correct. So let's talk about this for a second, the phonetic alphabet. Again, it definitely can be used. A, is it required when transmitting emergency messages? The fact of the matter is the answer is no, it is not required. Using your call sign using normal letters, KM8YOR, that's generally all you need. In fact, that's pretty much required all you need. It's best to say your call sign first, KM8YOR, and then if there's trouble hearing it, go ahead and use the phonetic alphabet. Mine would be Kilo Mike 8 Yankee Oscar Romeo. One of the first things you want to do when you get your call sign is go ahead and memorize how to say it normally, of course, and then say it with the phonetic alphabet. And make sure you're using the NATO phonetic alphabet. Most people will be kind if you're not using it or if you forget a letter and use something else. But NATO is the recommended one to use. B is it is encouraged. So it's encouraged as in, yeah, you should use it when you can, but you don't have to. And C is required when in contact with foreign stations. Of course, again, NATO being involved here. We definitely want to use the NATO phonetics when we're talking to foreign stations, because especially if they're a NATO country, they should generally know those as amateur radio operators in their states. So that's a great thing to use, but is it required? The answer again is no. We actually are required to speak English when we put out our call sign. So KM8YOR is good. Kilo Mike 8 Yankee Oscar Romeo is fine. We just have to get it out in English because it's mainly for people around us to hear, most importantly. And of course, all of these choices are correct. Is D, that is not the correct answer because we already eliminated a couple of these. So that leaves B as the correct answer. It is encouraged. It's not required. Especially if you're on like FM repeaters and stuff. Generally, everyone can make you out pretty easily. Sometimes using the phonetic alphabet is nice to kind of help people hear more clearly. K and M versus an N is kind of hard to decipher. Um, some of the other letters can get a little confusing, so sometimes say, hey, can you give it phonetically? And, no problem there. T1A04. How many operator primary station license grants may be held by any one person? 1 is A. B is no more than 2. C, 1 for each band on which the person plans to operate. Or D, 1 for each permanent station location from which the person plans to operate. So the simple answer, we talked a little bit about this earlier, it's all about an individual. The individual only needs 1 call sign. Correct answer is 1. Now, I have my call sign, and then as a club member, I can use the club call sign. But generally, if I'm operating by myself, I'm not in a group with the rest of the club, I should use my own call sign. I should not use the club's. When I'm at the club, I can use either. What proves that the FCC has issued an operator primary license grant? A, a printed copy of the certificate of successful completion of examination. B, an email notification from the NCVEC granting the license. C, the license appears in the FCC ULS database. Or D, all of these choices are correct. If you're new, you haven't really jumped into getting prepared for your tests and stuff like this, this may not be one you've encountered with. I encourage you to do it, get online and get in there and figure out where those licenses are and how you can find them. So let's talk about each answer for a minute. A printed copy of the certificate of successful completion of examination. So this is an important document that you will actually get when you pass your test, if you take it in person. What will happen is you'll fill it out. They'll say, yes, you passed your test. The VE team will sign it for you, so you should have 3 signatures on there saying that you passed. And then it'll say which element you passed and what license you're granted. And that piece of paper is good for 365 days. But if you don't have a license to begin with, it does nothing really for you other than prove you've passed the test. So it's not going to allow you as a technician to get on if you've never had a call sign before. So A is not correct. B, an email notification from the NCVEC granting the license. Again, no. Not sure off the top of my head what NCVEC is, but that is not correct. Nobody has any real power other than one particular organization. And so that means D is not correct. All of the choices are correct. So let's talk about the last one. C, the license appears in the FCC ULS database. This is correct. Please go ahead and Google FCC ULS. If you know some people that have call signs already, you can go ahead and type in your call sign in there, or their call sign, and look that up. And you'll get some information, what class they are. You may get a mailing address for them, things like that. One note, if you are capable of doing this, before you even sign up in the FCC ULS, which you need to do before you take the test, get yourself a P.O. box. That way you don't have to put your address down where you live for. The correct answer then is C. T1A06. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? So again, very specific. This is all about the FCC and what the Part 97 for amateur radio says about what is a beacon. So a government transmitter marking the amateur radio band edges. B, a bulletin sent by the FCC to announce a national emergency. C, a continuous transmission of weather information authorized in the amateur bands by the National Weather Service. D, an amateur station transmitting communication for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. So, like I kind of talked to you a little bit about earlier, the government doesn't have a lot of power. The FCC grants the license. The FCC has more power in amateur radio than the president does. Certainly the president can go and alter the rules, but they don't care about it that much, so they're not going to go do that. And the FCC has technical people involved that know about radio propagation and things like that, that positively and negatively affect things. So generally, president's just like, hey, write the rules, you do it yourself, and I'll trust you. Big organization, ARRL, does definitely influence the FCC as well as a couple other organizations. But the government is not sitting there marking the band edges for us with a beacon, so that's not it. B, a bulletin sent by the FCC to announce a national emergency. Nope, beacons are always running, it's not that. C, a continuous transmission of weather information authorized in the amateur bands by the National Weather Service. Nope, that is not the case. There obviously NOAA Weather Radio is out there. They are kind of close to the 2-meter amateur band, but they are not in the amateur band. They are in their own band. Nobody else, as far as I know, is allowed to use those bands. And then D, an amateur station transmitting communications for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. And that is the correct answer. One big thing about amateur radio is we help ourselves, we police ourselves, we do things to help each other. We don't expect the government. In fact, we don't really want the government to help us other than dish out our licenses. Get us our licenses, make sure things are accurate. If we do have a major issue or a conflict, yes, we're going to ask them to get involved. But beyond that, nope, just leave us alone, let's do our thing. T1A07. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? A, any satellite orbiting Earth. B, a manned satellite orbiting Earth. C, an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. Or D, an amateur station using amateur radio satellites for relay signals. So this is kind of a hard one, because if we haven't memorized Part 97, a lot of these answers sound pretty correct. One thing I've learned about taking these tests, when it comes to the FCC, one of the most detailed answers is most likely the correct answer. Not all the time, but generally. So any satellite orbiting Earth that's pretty, basic, the A is incorrect. B, a manned satellite orbiting Earth. Again, we think of the ISS, that's manned satellite orbiting Earth. So we definitely think about that as a space station. But when we as common people talk about a space station, we think of this right here, a manned satellite orbiting Earth, something out in space with people on it. They're not talking about a station in terms of a place where people are and gathered. They're talking about the radio station that's out there. So C, an amateur radio station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. That one sounds pretty good. Let's read D real quick. An amateur station using amateur radio satellites for relay of signals. That one sounds pretty good too. But C is more descriptive than D in reality, because it gives us a very specific. It's 50 kilometers above Earth's surfaces. So if you have some object, 40 kilometers above Earth's surface, it's just a station. If it's 50 or more, it becomes a space station. And C is the correct answer. Go to 8. Which of the following entities recommends transmit receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? A. Frequency spectrum manager appointed by the FCC. B. Volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. C. FCC regional field office. Or D. International Telecommunications Union. So again, let's talk about this. Let's go through them. A frequency spectrum manager appointed by the FCC. So again, kind of like FCC does not care too much about us and does not get too involved in the day-to-day operations of amateur radio outside of dishing out the call signs. So this is not a good answer to go to. B, volunteer frequency coordinator recognized by local amateurs. Okay, so we got the volunteer piece, we got local amateurs involved. Potential answer here. Let's look at the others. C, FCC regional field office. Well, again, they don't care that much about us, so probably not. D, International Telecommunications Union. So somebody above the FCC. The International Telecommunications Union is a real thing. It is something that we need to be aware of as amateur radios, but they affect the FCC more than they affect us. So that is not the correct answer. The correct answer is B. So let's go to T1A09. Who selects a frequency coordinator? Very simple question. See what our options are. A, the FCC Office of Spectrum Management and Coordination Policy. Well, again, we kind of talked about it in the last question. FCC not getting too involved with us. So B, the local chapter of the Office of National Council of Independent Frequency Coordinators. That is a mouthful. And no, not the correct answer. Let's see. Amateur operators in a local and regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater auxiliary stations. All right, this sounds pretty on target here. We got amateur radio involved, local and regional areas, people who are running the stations, repeaters and auxiliary stations. And then we have D, FCC Regional Field Office. Well, once again, we talked about that earlier. No, that they're not getting involved. So C is your best answer here. Got 2 more to go here. What is the Amateur Radio Civil Emergency Services, RACES? A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. Not bad answer, huh? B, a radio service using amateur stations for emergency management or civil defense communications. Kind of repeating there, but that happens. C, an emergency service using amateur operators certified by a civil defense organization as being enrolled in that organization. Or D, all these choices are correct. D, all of these choices are correct. Radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. So they're using our frequencies. Radio service using amateur stations. So now we're using the stations that get on the frequencies. And let's see, an emergency service using amateur operators certified by a civil defense organization as being enrolled in that organization. So again, a group of people that have gone together for civil defense. So they're citizens, they're not soldiers. They can be soldiers, but they're doing this as a citizen. And they're enrolled in that organization. So all of these choices are correct. Last question, T1A11. When is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? A. To stop another amateur station that is breaking the FCC rules. B. At no time. C. When making short test transmissions. D. At any time, stations in the amateur radio service are not protected from willful interference. This is an interesting question. So this is you're talking to your buddy, 20, 30 miles away, and someone just starts squawking on their radio on the same frequency you're on. Their intent is to interfere with your communication. Okay? So, does this happen? Unfortunately, yes, it does happen. Does it happen often? More than it should. Certainly, we had Amateur Radio Field Day, and it definitely dealt with some interference and difficulty contacting people because of that interference. But the reality is, are you allowed to do it? And the answer is no. At no time are you allowed to do this. So, real quickly, we're just going to go through them all. I'm going to read the question, read the answers, and then say nothing. This is a part of the video where, as you're studying, you're going to want to start at this point and then listen to the questions and try to get them right. So we're going to go all the way back. Alright, so I'm going to read these questions. I'm going to read the question, going to just read the answers, give you about 3 seconds to answer, and then show you the answer. Which of the following is part of the basis and purpose of the amateur radio service? A. Providing personal radio communications for as many citizens as possible. B. Providing communications for international nonprofit organizations. C. Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. Or D. All of these choices are correct. The correct answer is C. Advancing skills in the technical and communication phases of the radio art. 2. Which agency regulates and enforces the rules for the amateur radio service in the United States? A. FEMA. B. Homeland Security. C. The FCC. Or D. All of these choices are correct. And the correct answer? C. The FCC. What do the FCC rules state regarding the use of a phonetic alphabet for station identification in the amateur radio service? A. It is required when transmitting emergency messages. B. It is encouraged. C. It is required in contact with foreign stations. D. All of these choices are correct. And the correct answer is B. It is encouraged. How many operator primary station licenses grants may be held by any one person? A. 1. B. No more than 2. C. 1 for each band on which the person plans to operate. Or D. 1 for each permanent station location from which the person plans to operate. And the correct answer? A. 1. What proves that the FCC has issued an operator primary license grant? A. A printed copy of the Certificate of Successful Completion of Examination. B. An email notification from the NCVEC granting the license. C. The license appears in the FCC ULS database. Or D. All of these choices are correct. And the correct answer, C. The license appears in the FCC ULS database. 6. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a beacon? A. A government transmitter marking the amateur radio band edges. B. A bulletin sent by the FCC to announce a national emergency. C. A continuous transmission of weather information authorized in the amateur bands by the National Weather Service. Or D. An amateur station transmitting communications for the purposes of observing propagation or related experimental activities. And the correct answer is D. An amateur station transmitting communications for the purpose of observing propagation or related experimental activities. What is the FCC Part 97 definition of a space station? A. Any satellite orbiting Earth. B. A manned satellite orbiting Earth. C. An amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. Or D. An amateur station using amateur radio satellites for the relay of signals. C. An amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above Earth's surface. On this one, really focus on the 50 kilometers. Which of the following entities recommends transmit-receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? A. Frequency Spectrum Manager appointed by the FCC. B. Volunteer Frequency Coordinator recognized by local amateurs. C. FCC Regional Field Office. D. International Telecommunications Union. And the correct answer is B. Volunteer Frequency Coordinator recognized by local amateurs. So, who selects a frequency coordinator? A. The FCC Office of Spectrum Management and Coordination Policy. B. The local chapter of the Office of National Council of Independent Frequency Coordinators. C. Amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. Or D. FCC Regional Field Office. Correct answer, C. Amateur operators in a local or regional area whose stations are eligible to be repeater or auxiliary stations. 10. What is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services? A. A radio service using amateur frequencies for emergency management or civil defense communications. B. A radio service using amateur stations for emergency civil management or civil defense communications. C. An emergency service using amateur operators certified by a civil defense organization as being enrolled in that organization. Or D. All of these choices are correct. And your correct answer? D. All of these choices are correct. Last question. When is willful interference to other amateur radio stations permitted? A. To stop another amateur station that is breaking the FCC rules. B. At no time. C. When making short test transmissions. D. At any time, stations in the amateur radio service are not protected from willful interference. And the correct answer is B. At no time. I want to thank you so much for joining me. I hope you find this helpful in your studying, and let me know when you pass that test. This is KM8YOR signing off.